Let's move on to some lower body mobility that's really gonna free up the hips, especially for squatting or hinging movements on a barbell or with kettlebells. Now, after doing the arm bar and the bent arm bar, I like to go into an immediate prying goblet squat. Holding a kettlebell up in the goblet position, we're going to assume a squat stance. Dropping into our deep squat, I'm gonna use my elbows to now pry my hips open and start doing some rocks. These are the prying element of the goblet squat. I can get my elbows even deeper in my groin while lifting my chest and elongating my spine to really feel my adductors getting stretched out. I'm also rocking just onto the toes a little bit, working on my ankle flexibility. Ideally, my heels would be on the ground as I do this. My ankles are a bit tight. Just kind of repositioning the kettlebell, finding tight spots, leaning over my right toe. Now I'm leaning over my left toe. Now, for the prying goblet squat, you can hold this position anywhere from 45 seconds to about 75 seconds, depending on your needs. Make sure and pull the chest up so the spine is flat. To really get the ankles, put the kettlebell right on top of the knee, cradling it with one arm, drive the heel down and push the knee directly over the toe. This is fantastic to do before squatting because it's going to stretch out that soleus muscle and make sure that the ankles have adequate dorsiflexion. I like to push over my little toe, push over my middle toes, shift onto my big toe, really to get that ankle fired up before training. Just a little bit on my right side. This side's not as tight, so I'm not gonna do the pries or the movements for as long. I really need to just prioritize that left side due to a couple injuries. And remember, doing this for the long stretching session, you can work into it. Take some time, breathe into it. I already feel like it's loosening up quite a bit. I'll come back to my center position and out of the squat. Okay, putting the kettlebell down. Next, I like to go to a 90-90 series. Not only is the 90-90 stretch fantastic for the hips and the low back and obliques, but what we can do is bias it in certain ways for hip internal rotation or hip external rotation. So to get started, I typically sit in a position where if I roll to one side, I'm already in that 90-90 position. But to warm up my hip internal rotators, I'll sit in this position, hands behind me, and drop knee to the ground and alternate. And immediately when I do this, I feel the muscles in my hip, especially the posterior hip, really opening up. I'll typically do about 10 repetitions per side. Really using those muscles to pull the knee down, not trying to crank the knees at all. For myself specifically, this is really important. For a long time, I lacked a lot of hip internal rotation. Going to the physical therapist, I had a lot of hip external rotation, leading us to conclude I have retroverted hips. It's really difficult for me to squat with great positioning without pointing my toes out. I'll also get a little bit of a butt wink, so I always work on that when I'm squatting with barbells or kettlebells. If this feels funky, it's always a good idea to flex the abs a bit, try and get those obliques working to see if you can get a little bit lower. So after about 20 reps, I do a dynamic 90-90. What I'm gonna do, starting from the same position, I'm going to rock to one side, reach forward, almost like a dynamic stretch. I'm just doing this assisted on my arms. I'll typically do about 10 reps here. And I already feel my piriformis and my hips opening up. A little bit more. Just side to side, coupling this with my breathing. I'd inhale and exhale. Little by little, just opening up more and more. Nothing more than about a half a second stretch. After 10 reps, I'll rotate all the way behind me. I feel tight low back and obliques really opening up. This is perfect for me to do today because I did about 140 one-arm swings yesterday with a 32 kilo. I'm surprisingly sore from that, but it felt fantastic. Great conditioning session. And that is in my program design offered on my Substack. Lots of conditioning protocols that also offer power endurance, strength elements, and just really high capacity training. Okay, so hips are warmed up, internal rotators are warmed up, external rotators are warmed up. This was very challenging for me to do in the beginning, but I did it every day until I got better. Sitting from that original position, now arms outstretched in front of the body, I'm gonna rock into my internal rotation. Trying to touch the knee. Just back and forth, not cranking on the knee. I'm using my abs a lot to keep my body in place and just focusing on my hips warming up. Definitely feel like my right side's a bit tighter. So typically I'll just do my right side a few extra reps just to keep my body in balance. Whew. Okay, so that felt great on my hips in general. My abs feel like they're nice and warmed up for any sort of exercise I might do afterward or any sort of stretching. Next, we'll go into the world's greatest stretch series. I don't know why it's called the world's greatest stretch, but I believe it because it just opens up so much. So I'll start with my right foot forward. I like to get a really long stance. Hands are inside the knee. Now from here, I like to start by squeezing my left glute and moving my body side to side. I can feel my right hip really stretching out as well as the high hip flexor on my left. Just prying around similar to those goblet squats. Feels really good. I might also manually push out my front knee. Maybe do some circles, flossing just a bit. On this, I also like to do some light ballistic stretching just to get those hip flexors warmed up. If I'm especially tight, I'll even drop my elbows to the floor. I may hold 10-second stretch, also exploring the prying positions. And since we did those 90-90s earlier, my piriformis are kind of loose. But if I hadn't done those, I might bring the foot inside and go into almost a dynamic pigeon all the way down, all the way up, down, and up. And you can see on the up, I now have my legs straight, stretching into the hamstring. So although we're calling this mobility, a lot of it's dynamic stretching as well. With our dynamic stretches, if we're doing these before a workout, we're not holding the stretch much longer than about a second. So it's not going to sap our gains during the session, but it will bring us through a full range of motion. And then from there, I might sit into a little bit better position pigeon stretch. I'm not rounding my back. I'm driving my knee toward the floor. Still feel this in my left hip, but definitely in my right hip. Okay, that feels good. Remember, pry in all these positions, explore your body. That's what the long stretch is all about. Now, this can be a tough one to get into. So what I do is just kick my foot up and then I drop my hip, squeeze my left glute and do some dynamic prying side to side, forward and back, driving that hip toward the floor and toward the floor. This feels really good before squatting. I'm going to show you one more from a frog stretch. We're going to get the knees wide as we can, and the feet are going to be outside of knee level. I'm going to drop to my elbows. I'm going to tuck my tailbone so I'm in a neutral posture in my spine. I'm going to rock forward, acting like I'm pulling my pelvis apart, and drive back. I feel a big stretch in my groin. Couple this with my breathing. for about 10 reps or so. I'm gonna go on to straight arms, work to tuck my tailbone under, and I learned this hip rocker from Paul Chek. It's a fantastic exercise. I'm gonna drive my right hip toward the floor as I windshield wiper my right foot. Feel a big stretch in that high groin area and hip flexor, and I'll windshield wiper to the other side. And it really makes a difference if you flex the glute that's stretching of that stretching side. Just back and forth. If I have a particularly tight spot, I may spend a little bit more time on it, kind of moving my foot around. This stretch has really, really helped me out for my squatting. Just opening things up. We get so tight from sitting in the car, sitting at a desk. On top of that, people like to run, do a lot of squats. We get really tight in our upper back and neck and really tight in our hip flexors. That's why so many people have this so-called glute amnesia. So that is the lower body series for our mobility training prior to getting into our actual stretching. Remember, take the time that you need. You can use a kettlebell if that helps. You can do it with body weight. These are my go-tos. So let's get to the stretching.